In this video, I'm going to teach you how to crush the French defense with a less known gambit. This video will be divided in three parts. One is what happens when your opponent accepts the gambit. Second is what happens when your opponent declines the gambit. And third is the ideas of the middle game. So let's get right into the video. So you play e4 and your opponent responds with the French defense. And now you hit him with the move b3. In this position, your opponent will continue to play the French, which is d5, and you will not take, but you will go on with your plan, which is to go bishop to b2 and fianchetto the bishop on this diagonal. Now this is a very powerful bishop, and this is known as the Hortswith attack, the Papa Ticulat Gambit. The Papa Ticulat Gambit is gambiting this pawn, and we are going to look at what happens when your opponent takes, when your opponent does not take and continues with developing moves, etc. So first we are going to look at what happens when your opponent takes your gambit. Now we develop knight to c3 and hit this pawn. Your opponent can defend this pawn in two ways, either with the knight or with the pawn. If your opponent defends this pawn with the pawn and does this, this is bad for white, and now you can trade this pawn off with moves like this, developing your knight, and look at the development white has, and look at black is still sleeping. His king is really weak, and as you can see, white has the advantage, although white is a pawn down. You can also go moves like d3 and develop this bishop, which is also an option, and this is what I recommend, because a sample game may go like here, you go queen here, queen to e2. This is a very good move in the Papa Ticulat Gambit, because you pressure this pawn and you get ready to castle queenside, and as this file is open for the rook, this is really good. So you castle, and now this rook has vision on this queen, and the position is really bad for black. And as you can see, the computer thinks it's almost winning for white. You are really have extra development, and black is still sleeping. You'll go moves like, if your opponent doesn't do anything about this, you're going to play moves like this and simply demolish your opponent, and vice versa. If you choose to go here, this is totally fine too. If you choose to go here, this is totally fine too. You develop your knight, and after this you go with the same plan. You go queen to e2, queen to e2 and pressure this. You'll castle the next move, and you'll put pressure on this pawn. You can also choose this move order to go bishop here first, and then after bishop here, then going queen here, which is preferred by the computer, because if you don't develop your bishop first, then the bishop will be dormant. Here you can either castle queenside or kingside. The choice is up to you. Black can go moves like this, and you can castle queenside or kingside, but the general idea in the Papa Ticulat Gambit is to castle queenside, because when you castle queenside, this bishop is protected forever, and you will attack your opponent. If your opponent is not castled, you'll demolish, open up the center, open up this bishop, and yeah, you have a good position against the French defense. Now this is what happens when your opponent defends his pawn. The best move according to the computer is to play knight here, which most of your opponents will do. In this position, you go queen to e2, and there is no way to guard this pawn except for one. If your opponent goes queen here guarding this pawn, which is the only move in order to guard the pawn, you simply go here, and then after takes, your opponent has to drop back. You have monster development. You will castle and push p down the board next move, and you will be demolishing your opponent in this position, and you will win the game hopefully. So this is obviously bad. But what if your opponent does not guard with the queen and simply goes here? This is the best move according to the computer, and in this position you do not take this pawn, because this pawn is not going anywhere. You simply castle the king, and after your opponent castles, then you take the pawn. You have an open bishop. Your opponent can trade. You have an open bishop, and you have a powerful queen. You'll be playing moves like this, threatening checkmate like this, and you'll be sending your pawns as an avalanche on the board. Your opponent will play moves like this, weakening his squares. This bishop is like x-raying. You can go moves like here, and your opponent will have a really hard time in defending, because now this is really soft, and then you can exploit with moves like this and absolutely run your opponent down. And that is why the Papa Ticulat Gambit is really powerful against the French defense. And this is all of what happens when your opponent accepts the Gambit. Your opponent has the option not to accept the Gambit at all, and instead of accepting, he can play moves like this, which is the second most popular thing to do. In this position, you simply take this pawn, and after taking this pawn, your opponent will take back with either piece, and then you will simply develop this knight. You'll give this check to this king, you'll castle kingside, and still you have good control of the center. You have this powerful bishop which is always eyeing this pawn, and you have a good position against the French defense. And this totally takes all French players out of their theory. And you can go moves like this, here, win your structure, castle, put your rook here with the file, put your queen here, pressure like this, and your opponent will have a hard time moving this bishop because this tactic. And yeah, so this is all of what happens if the opponent plays moves like this. The second most popular approach is this. Your opponent can play moves like this, which is more passive, and again I recommend you snap this pawn and just castle kingside and vibe and win the game. There is simply nothing else your opponent can do. This is the only thing. If your opponent tries to do this, simply that's just bad. That's basically over extension. You go here, target this, your opponent can't protect because of this, and yeah, your opponent has to overextend, which is like really bad. And you play moves like c3 simply, and then like, yeah, you are cooking your opponent in this position and winning, because now your opponent doesn't have good center control. He has this weird pawn over here. This pawn is for here. Some position is uncoordinated. You have your pieces developed, a monster bishop on this diagonal. You have these knights sharing. You have this powerful pawn controlling. You'll go here, check, trade the piece, and castle the king, and you will win the game. Now, this is all the opening prep in the Papa Ticulat Gambit. Let's look at some middle game ideas in the Papa Ticulat. Let's look at the general idea. So the tactics are that, for example, this is a sample position, takes. So in this position, if your opponent plays a natural move like doing this to, like, obviously to take the knight, this is a blunder, because there's a tactic which is to go here or here, sacrificing your knight, because the bishop is opening and always pressing this pawn. So you always have to look at this, and you will win this rook and win the game. You're up material. And yeah, you always have to look for this pawn. If this bishop ever moves, you have to look at this pawn, because this pawn is really weak in the Papa Ticulat, and you can play moves like this and line up discovered attacks if your opponent ever tries to move this bishop without taking care of this problem. Like before doing this, now it's absolutely fine, because like yeah, now this is losing because there's no takes. So yeah, if your opponent ever tries to develop the bishop before the knight, you simply play boom and then snap this pawn off and win the rook and win the game. Yeah, that's all in the Papa Ticulat Gambit. So you guys should smash that subscribe button. None of your opponents will see this coming. Watch other videos that I have on this channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.